In Charleston General Hospital, a 76-year-old widow was about to discover the ultimate betrayal. What started as recovery from pneumonia took a shocking turn when she came face to face with her own children, planning her funeral while she lay supposedly unconscious. Jessica Smith wasn't your typical elderly patient. For over 40 years, she had spent her life building a catering empire from nothing, known for her razor-sharp business instincts and strategic mind that never missed a detail, including the hushed conversations of family members who thought she couldn't hear them plotting her financial demise. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The antiseptic smell of Charleston General Hospital had become Jessica Smith's unwelcome companion over the past 3 days, seeping into her consciousness like an unwanted houseguest. At 76, she'd imagined many ways her life might end, but lying in this sterile room with pneumonia ravaging her lungs hadn't been among them. The oxygen cannula felt foreign against her weathered face, and the constant beeping of monitors created a rhythm that seemed to mock the steady beat of her still strong heart. Jessica had always prided herself on being a light sleeper, a skill developed during 48 years of marriage to Robert, when his restless nights with back pain had trained her to wake at the slightest sound. Now, that same sensitivity served her in ways she never could have anticipated. Through the thin hospital walls and the barely closed door, voices drifted into her room like poison carried on the night air. "Keep your voice down, Marcus." Rebecca's whisper was sharp with anxiety. "Someone might hear." "Relax, she's unconscious." Dr. Martinez said the medication would keep her out for hours. Marcus's voice carried that familiar tone of dismissive authority that had grated on Jessica's nerves since he was a teenager. "Besides, we need to get this sorted out before she rallies again." Jessica's eyes remained closed, her breathing deliberately steady and shallow. Every instinct screamed at her to sit up, to demand an explanation, to remind them that she was very much alive and aware. But something deeper, perhaps the business acumen that had built her catering empire from nothing, kept her still and listening. "I still can't believe we're doing this," Rebecca continued, her voice trembling with what Jessica desperately hoped was guilt. "Mama's not even. I mean, she might recover. Look at her, Becca." Marcus's footsteps moved closer to the doorway and Jessica could picture him gesturing toward her supposedly unconscious form. "She's 76 years old with severe pneumonia. Dr. Martinez may not have said it outright, but we both heard what she didn't say. This is it. This is our mother's final decline." The words hit Jessica like physical blows. Final decline. They were discussing her death, as if it were a foregone conclusion, as if she were already gone. Her chest tightened and for a moment she wondered if the sensation was from the pneumonia, or from the crushing weight of betrayal. "Hartwell's office called me back this afternoon," Marcus continued, his voice taking on the tone he'd always used when discussing business deals. "They confirmed that the will is still the same as it was 5 years ago. You get 30%, I get 40%, and the remaining 30 goes to the grandchildren in trust. The house, the business assets, everything else gets divided proportionally." "How much do you think?" Rebecca's voice was barely audible now. "I had it appraised last year when she was sick with that kidney stone. The house alone is worth $2.3 million. The business assets, investments, and cash holdings, we're looking at close to $6 million total, maybe more if her stock portfolio has performed well." Jessica's mind reeled. Marcus had been appraising her assets while she recovered from a kidney stone? How long had he been planning for her death? How long had both her children been circling her like vultures, waiting for the moment to divvy up the remains of her life's work? "Jesus, Marcus." Rebecca's voice cracked. "$6 million? I had no idea it was that much. Why do you think I've been so careful about maintaining my relationship with her? You think I enjoyed all those Sunday dinners, pretending to care about her garden club gossip and her stories about the good old days with Dad?" Marcus's laugh was cold, devoid of any warmth Jessica had foolishly believed she'd seen in her eldest son's eyes over the years. "Every smile, every "I love you, Mom," every time I brought the kids by, it was all an investment, Becca. An investment that's about to pay off. The oxygen monitor continued its steady beeping, but Jessica felt as though all the air had been sucked from the room. This was Marcus, her firstborn, the child she'd stayed up nights with when he had colic, the boy she'd driven to every baseball practice and science fair, the man she'd bailed out of 3 failed business ventures, without a word of complaint, believing that family meant unconditional support. "I've already contacted Morrison Funeral Home," Marcus continued, his voice growing more businesslike with each word. "They can have everything ready within 48 hours of, well, you know, I told them we'd want something elegant, but not ostentatious. We don't want people thinking we're spending her money frivolously before the body's even cold." Body. He called her a body. Jessica's hand twitched involuntarily, and she forced herself to remain still. "Marcus, stop." Rebecca's voice was stronger now, tinged with what Jessica prayed was disgust. "This feels wrong. We're talking about our mother like she's already dead, like she's just a pile of money waiting to be counted." "She is dying, Rebecca." Marcus's patience was wearing thin. "And whether we like it or not, we need to be practical. You especially. How much debt are you carrying from Derek's gambling? 50,000? 60. With your share of the inheritance, you could pay that off, keep the house, and still have enough left over to send the kids to college without loans." There it was. The hook that would snare Rebecca's conscience. Jessica knew her daughter was drowning financially after her ex-husband's gambling had destroyed their marriage and their savings. But she'd never imagined that Rebecca would see her mother's death as a life preserver. "I never wanted it to be like this," Rebecca whispered, and Jessica heard the tears in her voice. "I love her, Marcus. I really do love her." "Love doesn't pay the bills, Becca. Love doesn't keep Tommy in pre-med school or put food on your table. Sometimes love means making hard choices." "Hard choices?" Jessica almost laughed at the euphemism. As if allowing, perhaps even hoping for, your mother's death was simply a difficult decision rather than a fundamental betrayal of everything family was supposed to mean. "I called Dr. Martinez yesterday," Marcus continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Asked her some questions about the progression of pneumonia in elderly patients, about comfort care versus aggressive treatment. I wanted to understand our options." "Our options?" Rebecca's voice was sharp again. "I'm not saying we should do anything to hurt her. But if Dr. Martinez believes that aggressive treatment might only prolong her suffering, well, maybe the kindest thing would be to let nature take its course. Peacefully. With dignity. Peaceful. Dignified." The words made Jessica's stomach turn. Marcus wasn't talking about letting nature take its course. He was talking about nudging it along. About ensuring that his investment would pay off sooner rather than later. "I need some coffee," Rebecca said suddenly. I can't think straight. There's a vending machine down the hall." "But, Becca," Marcus's voice took on a warning tone. "This stays between us. All of it. If anyone asks, we're just 2 children worried about their sick mother." "I know," Rebecca replied, her voice hollow. "I'm not stupid, Marcus." Their footsteps retreated down the hallway, leaving Jessica alone with the beeping monitors and the crushing weight of her new reality. For several minutes, she simply lay there, processing what she'd heard. Her children, the 2 people she'd loved most in the world after Robert's death, saw her as nothing more than a death benefit waiting to be claimed. The tears came then, hot and silent, rolling down her cheeks onto the sterile hospital pillow. But beneath the grief, something else was stirring. Something cold and calculating that reminded her of the woman who'd built a business empire through sheer force of will and strategic thinking. They thought she was dying. They thought she was weak, unconscious, helpless. They'd already written her obituary in their minds, already spent her money, already divided up the pieces of her life like players in some macabre game of Monopoly. But Jessica Smith hadn't built a $1 million business by being weak. She hadn't survived Robert's death and 5 years of widowhood by being helpless. And she certainly hadn't raised 2 children and accumulated substantial wealth by being naive about human nature. If Marcus and Rebecca wanted to play inheritance games while she was supposedly on her deathbed, then perhaps it was time to give them exactly what they thought they wanted, but not in the way they expected. A slow smile spread across Jessica's face as she stared at the ceiling, her mind already working through possibilities. They thought they were so clever, planning her funeral while she lay helpless in her hospital bed. What they didn't realize was that they'd just handed her the perfect weapon, their own greed and their assumption of her helplessness. She wouldn't confront them. She wouldn't rage or cry or demand explanations. Instead, she would do what she'd always done best. She would outthink them, outmaneuver them, and remind them exactly who Jessica Smith really was. After all, they wanted to plan her death while she was living. Perhaps it was time for her to plan their financial death while she was very much alive. The monitors continued their steady beeping, but now they sounded less like a countdown to death and more like a metronome marking time until her revenge began. Marcus was right about one thing. Sometimes love did mean making hard choices, and Jessica was about to make the hardest choice of all. The monitors continued their steady beeping, but now they sounded less like a countdown to death and more like a metronome marking time until Jessica's revenge began. It had been 3 hours since Marcus and Rebecca's hallway conversation, and Jessica had spent every minute of those hours planning. Her mind, sharp as ever despite her body's frailty, worked through possibilities with the same methodical precision that had once transformed a small catering business into a Charleston empire. The soft squeak of rubber soles on linoleum announced the arrival of the night shift nurse. Jessica had observed the hospital's rhythms over the past 3 days, noting the changing of the guard that occurred every 12 hours. The day nurses were efficient but hurried, their attention divided among too many patients. But the night shift brought Patricia Williams, a woman Jessica had instinctively liked from their first interaction. "How are you feeling tonight, Mrs. Smith?" Patty's voice was warm and genuine, unlike the practiced cheerfulness of some medical staff. She moved around Jessica's bed with practiced efficiency, checking monitors and adjusting the IV drip. "Your oxygen levels are looking better. Dr. Martinez will be pleased." Jessica made a calculated decision. Slowly, she opened her eyes and turned her head toward the nurse. "Patricia," she said, her voice deliberately weak but clear. "I need to tell you something." Patty immediately moved closer, her dark eyes showing genuine concern. At 44, she had the kind of face that had seen enough human drama to recognize when something was seriously wrong. "What is it, honey? Are you in pain?" "Not physical pain," Jessica whispered, glancing toward the door. "But I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Have you noticed anything unusual about my family's behavior?" Patty's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Her hand stilled on Jessica's wrist where she'd been checking her pulse. "What kind of unusual?" "The kind that would make a nurse with 15 years of experience wonder if a family is more interested in inheritance than recovery." Jessica's voice was stronger now, her eyes sharp and alert in a way that clearly surprised Patty. The nurse glanced toward the door, then pulled a chair closer to Jessica's bed and sat down. "Mrs. Smith, I'm not supposed to discuss other people's behavior with patients, but—" She paused, clearly wrestling with professional ethics and personal concern. "Your son has asked me some very specific questions about pneumonia recovery rates in elderly patients. And your daughter asked me yesterday what the hospital's policy was regarding DNR orders, and whether families could expedite the process if they felt a patient was suffering." Jessica's heart clenched, but her voice remained steady. "What did you tell them?" "I told them that medical decisions are made by doctors in consultation with patients when possible, and that our job is to provide the best care possible for recovery." Patty leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Smith, is there something you want to tell me?" For the next 10 minutes, Jessica recounted what she'd overheard, watching Patty's expression grow increasingly grim. When she finished, the nurse sat back in her chair, shaking her head. 15 years I've been doing this job," Patty said quietly. "I've seen families torn apart by grief. I've seen people make terrible decisions under stress. But this—" She looked directly at Jessica. "What do you want to do about it?" "I want to fight back," Jessica said simply. "But I need allies, people I can trust. Are you willing to help me?" Patty's answer came without hesitation. "What do you need?" Over the next hour, Jessica and Patty developed a strategy. Patty would document every conversation, every request, every suspicious behavior from the family. Jessica would continue to appear more ill than she actually was, using their assumptions about her condition as cover, while she gathered information and contacted her real allies. "There's something else," Patty said as she prepared to continue her rounds. "Your grandson came by yesterday evening. Tommy, Rebecca's boy. He seemed genuinely upset about your condition. Just sat here for an hour holding your hand, talking to you about school and telling you he loved you. He's different from the others." Jessica felt a flicker of hope. Tommy had always been special. The idealistic pre-med student who worked part-time to pay for school, who visited her regularly without any prompting from his mother. If anyone in her family could be saved from this moral bankruptcy, it might be him. "And Mrs. Smith?" Patty paused at the door. "There's been someone else asking about you. Your friend Eleanor called the nurses' station 3 times today, wanting to know about visiting hours and whether you were allowed to have phone calls." Eleanor? Of course. Her business partner of 30 years, her closest friend since Robert's death. If Jessica was going to mount a campaign, she needed Eleanor's sharp wit and uncompromising loyalty. The next morning brought Dr. Sarah Martinez for rounds. Jessica had always respected the young oncologist, brilliant, ethical, and refreshingly direct. As Dr. Martinez checked her chart and listened to her lungs, Jessica made another calculated decision. "Doctor, I need to ask you about the conversations you've had with my son Marcus." Dr. Martinez's hand stilled on her stethoscope. "Mrs. Smith, I can't discuss." "I'm not asking you to violate confidentiality," Jessica interrupted gently. "I'm asking you to be aware that my son may not have my best interests at heart when he asks about my treatment options." The doctor's eyes sharpened. "What are you telling me, Mrs. Smith?" Jessica gave her an abbreviated version of what she'd overheard, focusing on Marcus's medical inquiries and his interest in letting nature take its course. By the time she finished, Dr. Martinez's jaw was tight with controlled anger. "Mrs. Smith, I want you to know that all medical decisions about your care will be made by me, in consultation with you, based solely on your medical needs and your wishes. No one else has any authority over your treatment." "I understand. But doctor, I need you to document everything. Every request, every question, every suggestion from my family about my care. Can you do that?" "Absolutely." Dr. Martinez made a note in Jessica's chart. "And Mrs. Smith, your pneumonia is responding well to treatment. With continued improvement, you should be able to go home within the week." As the doctor left, Jessica felt the first real smile cross her face since this nightmare began. She wasn't dying, she was recovering. And soon, she would be in a position to show Marcus and Rebecca exactly what a strategic mistake felt like. The afternoon brought Eleanor Patterson, sweeping into the room like a silver-haired hurricane. At 73, Eleanor had lost none of her fire, and the moment she saw Jessica sitting up in bed with clear eyes, she knew something was different. "Jessica Marie Smith, you look far too alert for someone who's supposedly at death's door," Eleanor said, pulling up the visitor's chair. "What's going on?" Jessica told her everything. Eleanor's face went through a range of emotions: shock, disgust, fury, and finally a cold determination that Jessica recognized from their business days. "Those ungrateful little parasites," Eleanor said when Jessica finished. "After everything you've done for them, everything you've given them." She shook her head. "What's the plan?" "I need you to call Bill Hartwell. Tell him I need to see him tomorrow and that it's urgent estate business." "But Eleanor, I need him to come here under the pretense of updating my will. I want Marcus and Rebecca to think I'm making final arrangements." Eleanor's smile was sharp. "You're going to let them think they've won." "Exactly. While they're planning my funeral, I'm going to be planning their financial ruin. And you want me to help spread the word in Charleston society that your children are already counting their inheritance money while you're sick? Can you do that without it being traced back to me?" Eleanor's laugh was wicked. "Honey, I've been spreading gossip in this town since before you moved here. I can have half of Charleston whispering about Marcus and Rebecca's greed by Sunday dinner." As Eleanor prepared to leave, she paused at the door. Jessica, are you sure about this? Once you start down this path, there's no going back. Your relationship with your children will never be the same. Jessica thought about Marcus calling her a body and discussing her death like a business transaction. She thought about Rebecca borrowing money against her expected inheritance, while Jessica lay supposedly dying. Eleanor, my relationship with my children ended the moment they started planning my funeral while I was still breathing. Now I'm just going to make sure they understand the consequences of their choices. The evening brought an unexpected visitor. Jimmy, Marcus's son, still in his army fatigues and looking exhausted from travel. 25 years old, with the bearing of a soldier and eyes that had seen too much, he approached Jessica's bed with genuine concern. "Grandma Jess? I came as soon as I got Dad's message about you being sick." He took her hand gently. "How are you feeling?" For the first time in days, Jessica felt tears of something other than betrayal. "Better now that you're here, sweetheart." They talked for an hour about his deployment, his plans for college, his genuine concern for her health. When visiting hours ended and Jimmy reluctantly prepared to leave, Jessica made one more strategic decision. "Jimmy, I want you to know that no matter what happens, no matter what you might hear about me or from your father, I love you and I'm proud of the man you've become." Something in her tone must have alerted him, because his grip on her hand tightened. "Grandma, is everything okay? I mean, beyond the pneumonia?" Jessica looked into his honest eyes and saw something she hadn't seen in Marcus for years. Genuine love, uncontaminated by greed. "Everything will be okay, sweetheart, but I want you to remember what I just told you, no matter what." As Jimmy left, Jessica settled back against her pillows with a sense of satisfaction she hadn't felt since this ordeal began. She had allies now: Patty, Eleanor, Dr. Martinez, and possibly Jimmy. Tomorrow, Bill Hartwell would come, and the real game would begin. Marcus and Rebecca thought they were so clever, planning her death while she lay helpless. But Jessica Smith had built an empire by being smarter, more ruthless, and more strategic than anyone expected. And now, with her supposed weakness as the perfect cover, she was about to remind them exactly who they were dealing with. The monitors beeped steadily through the night, but now they sounded like a countdown to justice. The morning sun filtered through the hospital blinds, casting long shadows across Jessica's room as she prepared for what she knew would be a crucial day. Her recovery was progressing faster than she'd let anyone except Dr. Martinez and Patty know, but maintaining the facade of decline required careful orchestration. She'd barely touched her breakfast, leaving the tray strategically positioned to suggest she was too weak to eat. At precisely 10 o'clock, Marcus arrived with an unexpected companion, Linda Chen Smith, his ex-wife. Jessica's eyes remained closed, but she could hear the tension in their whispered conversation as they approached her bed. "I still don't understand why you needed me here," Linda hissed, her voice carrying that familiar edge of controlled irritation that had grated on Jessica's nerves throughout their 15-year marriage. "Because despite our divorce, you're still Jimmy's mother, and you still have a financial stake in how this plays out," Marcus replied. "Besides, you know how to handle delicate situations better than Rebecca does." Jessica almost snorted at that. Linda's idea of handling delicate situations usually involved manipulation and emotional blackmail, but she forced herself to remain still, breathing shallowly as they moved closer to her bed. "She looks terrible," Linda said, her voice now carrying what Jessica recognized as manufactured concern. "Are you sure she's not conscious? Her eyes are moving." "REM sleep," Marcus said dismissively. "Dr. Martinez explained it yesterday. The medication keeps her sedated, but her brain is still active. She can't hear us." If only you knew, Jessica thought grimly. She'd been reducing her pain medication by palming pills and hiding them under her tongue before spitting them out later, maintaining just enough sedation to appear unconscious while keeping her mind sharp. "Have you talked to Rebecca about the arrangements?" Linda asked, settling into the visitor's chair with the proprietary air of someone who belonged there. "She's wavering. Getting cold feet about the whole thing." Marcus's frustration was evident. "She keeps talking about guilt and family loyalty. I need her on board completely, or this could get complicated." "What kind of complicated?" The kind where she decides to contest the will or demand an investigation into Mother's care. Rebecca always was too emotional for business decisions. Jessica felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. Perhaps Rebecca wasn't completely lost to greed after all. "So what do you need from me?" Linda's voice had taken on the calculating tone Jessica remembered from family gatherings, when Linda would assess every conversation for potential advantage. "I need you to help convince Rebecca that we're doing the right thing. You're good at that, making people see reason when their emotions are getting in the way. And what's in it for me?" Linda's directness shouldn't have surprised Jessica, but it still stung. This woman had sat at Jessica's dinner table for 15 years, had been welcomed as a daughter, and now she was negotiating her cut of the inheritance like a business transaction. 10% of my share," Marcus said without hesitation. "That's nearly $200,000, Linda. Enough to pay off your credit cards and put Jimmy through college without loans. Make it 15%, and I'll not only convince Rebecca, I'll help you handle any complications that might arise with the medical staff." Jessica's blood ran cold. What kind of complications was Linda planning? 15% of $2.5 million is over $300,000, Marcus said slowly. "That's a lot of money for some conversations with Rebecca." "I'm not just talking about conversations, Marcus." Linda's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I'm talking about making sure this situation resolves itself quickly and quietly. Your mother is 76 years old with severe pneumonia. Sometimes elderly patients take unexpected turns for the worse, especially when they're not getting optimal care." The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of monitors. Jessica fought to keep her breathing regular as the full implications of Linda's words sank in. They weren't just planning to inherit her money, they were planning to ensure she died soon enough to claim it. "Linda, I don't want to know the details," Marcus said finally. "But if you can guarantee this ends within the next week or two, 15% is fair. Consider it done. I've been volunteering at Presbyterian Hospital for 3 years. I know how these places work, how busy the nursing staff gets, how easy it is for small mistakes to happen. A missed medication here, a delayed response to an emergency there." Jessica's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to remain motionless. They were discussing her murder with the casual tone of people planning a dinner party. "What about Dr. Martinez?" Marcus asked. "She's been very attentive to Mother's care." "Dr. Martinez is an oncologist, not a geriatrician. She's probably never dealt with a pneumonia case this severe in an elderly patient. If I suggest some alternative treatments that might be more aggressive, she might see the wisdom in a more palliative approach." The door opened, interrupting their conversation. Jessica heard Rebecca's voice, shaky and uncertain. "Marcus? What's Linda doing here?" "Helping us figure out the best way forward," Marcus said smoothly. "We need to make some decisions about Mother's care, and Linda has experience with medical situations." "What kind of decisions?" Rebecca's voice was immediately suspicious. "Sit down, Rebecca," Linda said in the tone she'd always used when she wanted to appear maternal and wise. "We need to talk about what's best for your mother." For the next 20 minutes, Jessica listened to Linda weave a masterful web of manipulation. She spoke about dignity, about preventing suffering, about the kindness of allowing a natural death rather than prolonging agony through aggressive medical intervention. She painted a picture of Jessica as a woman ready to let go, held back only by medical procedures that served no purpose beyond extending inevitable suffering. Rebecca's resistance crumbled gradually. Jessica could hear it in her daughter's voice. The way her objections became weaker, her questions less challenging, her acceptance more resigned. "I just don't want her to suffer," Rebecca finally whispered. "None of us do," Linda said soothingly. "That's why we're having this conversation. Sometimes love means making the hard choice to let go. But what if she recovers? What if we're wrong about how sick she is?" "Look at her, Rebecca," Marcus said harshly. "She's been unconscious for days. She can barely breathe without oxygen. Dr. Martinez may not want to say it directly, but we all know what's happening here." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jessica heard footsteps approaching her bed, And then Rebecca's voice, very close to her ear. "I'm sorry, Mama," Rebecca whispered, her voice thick with tears. "I'm so sorry for all of this, but I can't lose the house. I can't let Tommy drop out of school. I need you to understand that I love you, but I just can't." The footsteps retreated, and Jessica heard the distinctive sound of Rebecca crying. "She'll be fine," Linda said dismissively. "Guilt is temporary. Financial security is permanent." "What's our timeline?" Marcus asked. "Give me 48 hours to set things in motion. I'll talk to some of the nursing staff. Suggest that your family is concerned about your mother's quality of life. Plant some seeds about how much everyone is suffering watching her decline. By the end of the week, if nature hasn't taken its course, we'll help it along. And if there are questions afterward, there won't be. Pneumonia in elderly patients often leads to complications. Heart failure, respiratory distress, blood clots. Any number of natural causes that no one will question." They left soon after, their conspiracy complete, and their timeline established. Jessica lay in the gathering darkness of her room, processing what she'd heard. They weren't just planning to inherit her money, they were planning to kill her for it. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They assumed she was helpless, unconscious, unable to fight back. They'd revealed their entire plan within earshot of their intended victim, never suspecting that Jessica Smith was very much awake, and already several steps ahead of them. Tomorrow, Bill Hartwell would arrive, and then the real game would begin, not just for her fortune, but for her life. The monitors continued their steady rhythm, but now they sounded like a battle hymn. Jessica Smith had built an empire by being smarter and more ruthless than anyone expected. It was time to remind her family exactly what that meant. The morning brought William Bill Hartwell exactly as Jessica had requested. At 67, her longtime attorney still cut an imposing figure, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, carrying himself with the quiet authority that had made him one of Charleston's most respected estate lawyers. Jessica had called him the previous evening during Patty's shift, speaking in carefully measured whispers that conveyed both urgency and secrecy. "Jessica, my dear," Bill said softly as he approached her bed, his voice carrying just the right note of professional concern mixed with personal affection. "I came as soon as I could arrange it." Jessica opened her eyes slowly as if struggling to focus. "Bill? Thank goodness you're here. I need to make some changes." What followed was a carefully orchestrated performance, Jessica, speaking in a weak voice punctuated by apparent difficulty breathing, outlined her final wishes, while Bill took meticulous notes. But beneath the surface theater, they were planning something far more sophisticated than anyone in her family could imagine. The first phase of Jessica's counterattack had actually begun 3 days earlier, when she'd had Patty make a series of seemingly innocent phone calls on her behalf. Bills of sale were being reviewed, loan agreements were being examined, and financial guarantees that Marcus had forgotten about were being quietly activated. "The Magnolia Street property loan," Jessica whispered to Bill, referencing one of Marcus's failed restaurant ventures. "The personal guarantee I signed. Can it be called?" "Absolutely," Bill replied, his pen moving across his legal pad. "The balloon payment was actually due 6 months ago, but you'd been allowing the extension. We can demand immediate payment of the full $200,000. Marcus's financial house of cards had been built on his mother's quiet support over the years. Every failed business venture, every emergency loan, every time he'd asked for help with his mortgage or credit cards, Jessica had kept meticulous records, and more importantly, she'd structured these transactions legally. What Marcus had seen as gifts from his generous mother were actually loans with clear terms and personal guarantees. 20 minutes into their meeting, Marcus arrived with Rebecca, both carrying flowers and wearing expressions of manufactured grief. "Mr. Hartwell," Marcus said, his surprise obviously genuine. "I didn't know Mother had asked to see you." "Your mother wanted to review her estate planning," Bill replied smoothly, not looking up from his notes. Given her current condition, she felt it was prudent to ensure everything was in order. Jessica watched Marcus's face carefully as Bill continued. "In fact, Marcus, there are some financial matters we need to discuss. Some outstanding obligations that may need to be addressed before we can finalize any estate transfers." "What kind of obligations?" Rebecca asked, moving closer to the bed. Well, there's the matter of the loans, Bill said, consulting his notes. The Magnolia Street restaurant loan, the King Street retail space guarantee, the personal loan for the import business venture. These total just over $400,000, all with your mother as the guarantor. Marcus's face went pale. Mother said those were gifts. I'm afraid not, Bill said gently. Your mother was very generous in not demanding regular payments, but these were always structured as loans with personal guarantees. And given her current medical situation, the bank is requiring that these obligations be cleared before any estate distributions can occur. Jessica had to suppress a smile as she watched Marcus process this information. His entire inheritance plan was suddenly complicated by debts he'd forgotten about, debts that would need to be paid immediately upon her death, effectively wiping out most of his expected windfall. There's also the matter of the investment portfolio, Bill continued. Your mother has decided to restructure several holdings, some charitable donations she wants to make while she's still able to see their impact. Charitable donations? Rebecca's voice was sharp with alarm. The Presbyterian Hospital Foundation, the Charleston Area Literacy Council, and a new foundation she wants to establish to help elderly people facing financial abuse from family members. Bill's delivery was perfectly deadpan. She's quite passionate about that last one. The irony was exquisite. Jessica was donating Marcus's expected inheritance to causes that would help people in her exact situation, while her son stood beside her bed calculating how much of his assumed fortune was evaporating. Mr. Hartwell, Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled panic. Surely these decisions should wait until Mother is feeling better? She's heavily medicated, possibly not thinking clearly. Your mother's mental faculties are perfectly intact, Bill replied firmly. Dr. Martinez has confirmed her competency, and these decisions are entirely rational given her current circumstances. As Bill packed up his papers and prepared to leave, he delivered the final blow with surgical precision. Oh, and Marcus, you should expect some calls from creditors over the next few days. Your mother had been quietly covering several of your credit obligations as a co-signer, but given her current medical expenses, she's asked me to review all such arrangements. Some of those guarantees may need to be withdrawn. After Bill left, Jessica listened to Marcus and Rebecca argue in hushed, frantic whispers outside her room. The financial pressure was already working exactly as she'd planned, driving them toward increasingly desperate measures. Meanwhile, Eleanor was executing her part of the plan with characteristic efficiency. By noon, 3 different members of Charleston's tight-knit social circle had called the hospital asking about Jessica's condition, expressing shock at rumors that her children were, quote, already planning the funeral arrangements. By evening, those same social circles would be buzzing with whispered conversations about the Smith family's unseemly haste to claim their inheritance. The afternoon brought Dr. Martinez for rounds, accompanied by a stern-faced woman Jessica didn't recognize. Mrs. Smith, this is Dr. Patricia Wong from the hospital's ethics committee, Dr. Martinez said. She'd like to ask you some questions about your care preferences. What followed was a careful interview designed to document Jessica's actual wishes regarding her treatment. Dr. Wong asked detailed questions about Jessica's desire for aggressive care, her mental state, and whether she felt any pressure from family members regarding her medical decisions. Mrs. Smith, have any family members suggested that you might want to consider discontinuing treatment or pursuing a more, quote, palliative approach? Dr. Wong asked. Not directly to me, Jessica replied carefully, but I want you to know that I very much want to recover. I want every appropriate medical intervention. I'm not ready to give up. Dr. Wong made careful notes, creating a documented record of Jessica's wishes that would make any family interference in her care legally problematic. The evening brought the most satisfying development yet. Marcus received a phone call during visiting hours, and Jessica watched his face crumble as he listened to whoever was on the other end. What do you mean the line of credit is frozen? He said, his voice rising despite his attempt to maintain composure. I've been making payments. My mother guaranteed that loan. The conversation continued for several minutes, with Marcus growing increasingly agitated. When he finally hung up, his hands were shaking. "What was that about?" Rebecca asked. "The bank. They're calling in all the loans that Mother guaranteed. They want $400,000 by the end of the month, or they start seizing assets. But the inheritance doesn't help if she doesn't die soon enough." Marcus's voice cracked with desperation. "And even then, Bill says the debts have to be paid before any distributions. We could end up with nothing." Jessica felt a deep satisfaction watching Marcus confront the reality of his financial situation. For years, he'd lived off her generosity, building his lifestyle on the assumption of her eventual death. Now that assumption was proving to be his downfall. Linda arrived just as visiting hours were ending, her face grim with purpose. "We need to accelerate our timeline," she said without preamble. "I've been talking to some of the nursing staff, and there are rumors that the family is being investigated for potential elder abuse. We need to move now, before this gets out of hand." "How quickly?" Marcus asked. "Tomorrow night. I can arrange for a shift change confusion, maybe a medication error. It will look natural. Complications from pneumonia, very common in elderly patients." Jessica's blood ran cold, but she forced herself to remain perfectly still. They were planning her murder for tomorrow night. "I don't know if I can go through with this," Rebecca whispered. "You don't have a choice," Linda said harshly. "The bank is calling in loans, the inheritance is being donated to charity, and there are ethics investigators asking questions. If we don't act now, you'll lose everything anyway." As they left, Jessica's mind was already working through the next phase of her plan. They thought they were cornering her, forcing her into a position of helplessness. They had no idea that Jessica Smith's most dangerous weapon had always been her ability to appear weak, while positioning herself for total victory. Tomorrow night, they would discover exactly what she was capable of when truly threatened. The next day dawned gray and oppressive, matching Jessica's mood as she prepared for what she knew would be the most dangerous 24 hours of her life. Linda's deadline loomed like a sword over her head, but Jessica had spent the sleepless night hours finalizing her own preparations. If they wanted to play deadly games, she would ensure she held all the cards. The morning shift brought unexpected drama. Marcus and Linda arrived early, but their hushed conversation in the hallway quickly escalated into something far from quiet. "You said you could handle this discreetly," Marcus hissed, his voice carrying through the thin walls despite his attempt at whisper. "Now there are ethics investigators asking questions, the bank is demanding immediate payment, and Bill Hartwell is treating every family conversation like a potential crime." "I can still handle it," Linda replied, her voice sharp with irritation. "But you need to stop panicking. Desperate people make mistakes, and we can't afford mistakes." "Mistakes? You want to talk about mistakes? You told me this would be simple. Natural causes, no questions, quick resolution. Instead, everything is falling apart." Jessica listened with grim satisfaction as their alliance began to fracture under pressure. She'd learned long ago that greed made people paranoid, and paranoia made them turn on each other. "The plan hasn't changed," Linda said, her voice taking on the cold edge Jessica remembered from family arguments. "Tonight, during the shift change, I'll create a distraction. Your mother's oxygen levels will drop, her heart will go into distress, and by the time anyone responds, it will be too late. Pneumonia complications, very tragic, very believable. And if there's an investigation, there won't be. I know how to make this look natural. But Marcus, once we do this, there's no going back. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed?" The silence stretched for several seconds. Jessica held her breath, wondering if her son might find some last vestige of conscience, some memory of the mother who had loved and supported him for 52 years. "How much time do we have before the bank starts seizing assets?" Marcus asked finally. 2 weeks, maybe 3 if we can negotiate." "Then yes, we proceed tonight." Jessica's heart broke and hardened simultaneously. Her son had just chosen money over her life, with the cold calculation of a business transaction. The afternoon brought Rebecca, visibly distraught and accompanied by Tommy. Jessica's 19-year-old grandson looked tired and worried, his pre-med textbooks tucked under his arm as if he'd come straight from class. "How is she today?" Tommy asked his mother, approaching Jessica's bed with genuine concern. "The same," Rebecca replied, but her voice cracked on the words. "Tommy, I need to tell you something. About the family situation." What followed was the most devastating conversation Jessica had ever witnessed. Rebecca, her voice thick with tears and guilt, confessed everything to her son. She told him about the inheritance planning, about the conversations with Marcus and Linda, about the pressure to let their grandmother die with dignity. Tommy's reaction was immediate and explosive. "Are you insane?" he said, his voice rising dangerously. "You're talking about letting Grandma die for money? She's not even dying. Look at her. Her color is better. Her breathing is stronger. Dr. Martinez told me yesterday that she's responding well to treatment. Tommy, you don't understand the financial pressure. No, Mom, you don't understand." Tommy's voice was shaking with rage and disbelief. "You're talking about murder. That's what this is. You and Uncle Marcus and Linda are planning to murder my grandmother for her money." Rebecca broke down completely then, sobbing with the kind of desperate grief that comes from knowing you've crossed a line you can never uncross. "I'm sorry," she whispered over and over. "I'm so sorry. I don't know how it got this far. I don't know how I became this person." Tommy stared at his mother for a long moment, then walked to Jessica's bedside. He took her hand gently, and Jessica felt the warmth of genuine love, perhaps the last she would ever feel from her family. "Grandma," he said softly, "I don't know if you can hear me, but I want you to know that I'm going to protect you. Whatever it takes, I won't let them hurt you." Behind him, Rebecca continued crying, but Tommy's attention was focused entirely on Jessica. And in that moment, Jessica made a decision that could ruin everything she'd planned. She opened her eyes. Tommy's gasp was audible. "Grandma, you're awake?" "I've been awake for days, sweetheart," Jessica said softly, her voice clear and strong. "I've heard everything." The color drained from Rebecca's face. "Mama? You? You've been listening?" "Every word." Jessica's eyes, sharp with intelligence and fury, fixed on her daughter. "Every plan, every calculation, every moment when you chose money over your mother's life." Rebecca collapsed into the visitor's chair, her body shaking with the magnitude of her exposure. "Mama, I can explain." "Can you?" Jessica's voice was quietly devastating. "Can you explain why you've been planning my funeral while I'm still alive? Can you explain why you've borrowed money against my death? Can you explain why you're going to let Linda murder me tonight?" Tommy's head snapped toward his mother. "Tonight? What's happening tonight?" Through her tears, Rebecca told him about Linda's plan. About the shift change, the manufactured medical emergency, the planned complications that would end Jessica's life by morning. Tommy was already reaching for his phone. "I'm calling the police." "No," Jessica said firmly. "Not yet." Both Tommy and Rebecca stared at her in shock. "Grandma, they're planning to kill you tonight," Tommy said desperately. "We have to stop them." "We will stop them," Jessica replied, her voice carrying the steel that had built her business empire. "But not the way you think." Over the next hour, Jessica revealed the full scope of her counterattack to Tommy, watching her grandson's expression shift from horror to amazement to something approaching awe. She told him about the financial traps she'd set for Marcus, about the social pressure Eleanor was applying, about the legal documentation she'd arranged with Bill Hartwell. "You've been planning this for days," Tommy said finally. "While they thought you were dying, you were destroying them." "I was protecting myself," Jessica corrected. "And now I need you to help me finish it." Rebecca, who had been silent through this revelation, finally spoke up. "Mama, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but please, let me help. Let me try to make this right." Jessica studied her daughter's face, seeing genuine remorse for the first time in days. "Are you prepared to testify against Marcus and Linda? To face the legal consequences of conspiracy?" "Yes," Rebecca said without hesitation. "I'll do whatever it takes." "Then here's what we're going to do," Jessica said. her voice taking on the commanding tone she'd once used to run board meetings. "Tommy, I need you to contact Dr. Martinez and ask her to arrange for additional security tonight. Tell her we have credible information about a threat to my safety. Rebecca, you're going to call Marcus and Linda and confirm that tonight's plan is still on." "But, Grandma," Tommy started. "They think I'm unconscious and helpless," Jessica said with a smile that was anything but weak. "Let's give them exactly what they expect. Right up until the moment they discovered that the woman they've been planning to murder has been planning their destruction for much longer than they have." The afternoon sun was setting, casting long shadows across the hospital room. In a few hours, Marcus and Linda would arrive expecting to find a helpless victim. Instead, they would discover that Jessica Smith had spent a lifetime learning how to turn apparent weakness into absolute strength. And tonight, they would learn that lesson in the most devastating way possible. The monitors continued their steady rhythm, but now they sounded like a countdown to reckoning. The evening arrived with the oppressive weight of an approaching storm. Jessica lay in her hospital bed, no longer feigning unconsciousness but maintaining the appearance of fragile weakness for any staff members who might observe her. The real performance would begin soon enough. Dr. Martinez had responded to Tommy's call with professional alarm and immediate action. Within 2 hours, she had arranged for additional security, positioned trusted nursing staff for the evening shift, and installed discreet monitoring equipment that would record everything happening in Jessica's room. But most importantly, she had agreed to Jessica's audacious plan for the ultimate test of her family's moral boundaries. "Are you absolutely certain about this, Mrs. Smith?" Dr. Martinez asked during her final rounds of the day. "What you're proposing is extremely risky, even with all our precautions." "Doctor, they're planning to murder me tonight," Jessica replied matter-of-factly. "I'd rather control the circumstances of their attempt than wait helplessly for them to act." At 7:30, Rebecca made the call that would set everything in motion. "Marcus? It's me," she said, her voice carefully modulated to sound defeated and resigned. "I've been thinking about what you and Linda discussed. About tonight." Jessica could hear Marcus's response through the phone, his voice sharp with attention. "And? I think you're right. About letting her go peacefully. I can't watch her suffer anymore." Rebecca's performance was flawless, her voice carrying just the right note of heartbroken acceptance. "Good. Linda has everything arranged. The shift change happens at 10 o'clock. By 10:30, it will be over. What do you need me to do?" "Just be here. Be present so it looks like the family was gathered, hoping for the best. And Rebecca, once this happens, there's no going back. We all have to stick to the same story." "I understand," Rebecca said, and then added with devastating irony, "We're family. We stick together." As Rebecca hung up, Jessica felt a surge of pride in her daughter's courage. It took strength to face the consequences of betrayal, and even more strength to help trap the people you'd conspired with. At 8 o'clock, Jimmy arrived unexpectedly, still in his army uniform and carrying a duffel bag. "Grandma," he said, approaching her bed with concern. "Dad called and said you'd taken a turn for the worse. I got emergency leave to come see you." Jessica's heart ached for this young man, Marcus's son, but clearly nothing like his father in character or values. Jimmy represented everything she'd hoped her children would become. Honorable, selfless, genuinely caring. "Jimmy, sweetheart, I need to tell you something important," Jessica said, reaching for his hand. "And I need you to listen carefully, because what I'm about to say will be difficult to hear." Over the next 20 minutes, Jessica explained everything: the overheard conversations, the inheritance conspiracy, and most devastatingly, the murder plot scheduled for later that evening. She watched Jimmy's face cycle through disbelief, horror, and finally, cold military determination. "Dad is planning to murder you?" Jimmy's voice was deadly quiet. "His own mother?" "I'm afraid so. But Jimmy, I need you to stay calm. We have a plan, and it's going to work. But I need you to trust me and do exactly what I ask." "Anything, Grandma?" What do you need? I need you to be here tonight, but I need you to act surprised when things start happening. Can you do that? Jimmy's jaw tightened. You want me to let them try to kill you? I want you to let them think they're succeeding, Jessica corrected. There's a difference. At 9:45, Marcus and Linda arrived together, their faces appropriately somber for what appeared to be a deathbed vigil. Marcus carried flowers. White roses, Jessica noted with dark irony. Funeral flowers. How is she? Marcus asked Rebecca, his voice pitched perfectly for any eavesdropping medical staff. Weaker, Rebecca replied, staying in character. Dr. Martinez said her oxygen levels have been dropping all day. Linda moved efficiently around the room, positioning herself near the medical equipment with the casual authority of someone familiar with hospital settings. She checked the oxygen flow, examined the IV lines, and made small adjustments that would appear routine to any casual observer. The nursing staff is dealing with an emergency down the hall, Linda said quietly. Food poisoning outbreak from the cafeteria. Very convenient timing. Jessica had to admire Linda's thoroughness. She'd clearly been planning this for more than just the past few days. At exactly 10 o'clock, the shift change began. Jessica could hear the bustle of departing day staff and arriving night workers, the handoff of patient information, the brief period of confusion that always accompanied such transitions. Now, Linda said simply, what happened next unfolded with the precision of a military operation. Linda reached for Jessica's oxygen cannula, her movements swift and practiced. At the same moment, she pressed something against Jessica's IV port. Probably a syringe, Jessica realized, containing whatever medication Linda had prepared to simulate cardiac distress. But as Linda's hands moved toward the equipment, Jessica opened her eyes and looked directly at her would-be killer. Hello, Linda, Jessica said clearly. Having trouble with the medical equipment? Linda froze, her face going white with shock. You're conscious. I've been conscious for days, Jessica replied, her voice growing stronger. I've heard every word of your plan. Marcus stepped forward, his face cycling through confusion, fear, and then calculation. Mother, you're confused. The medication I've been pretending to take while listening to you plan my murder? Jessica sat up in bed, pulling the oxygen cannula away from her face with steady hands. I'm not confused, Marcus. I'm furious. The room erupted in chaos. Linda tried to bolt for the door, but found her way blocked by two security guards who had been positioned just outside. Marcus grabbed for his phone, but Jimmy was faster, knocking it from his father's hands. You're both under arrest, came a voice from the doorway. Detective Ray Hoffman of the Charleston Police Department stepped into the room, followed by Dr. Martinez and Patty Williams. This is ridiculous, Marcus said, his voice rising with desperation. We haven't done anything wrong. Mother is obviously having some kind of psychotic episode. Actually, we have everything on video, Dr. Martinez said coolly, gesturing to the discreet cameras that had been recording for the past hour. Your conversation about the murder plan, Linda's tampering with medical equipment, and the attempted administration of what I suspect is a lethal dose of potassium chloride. Linda's face crumpled as she realized the scope of their exposure. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she whispered. It was supposed to be quick, painless, natural causes. Natural causes? Jessica's voice was incredulous. You were planning to murder me for money, and you thought that was natural? As the police read Miranda rights and applied handcuffs, Jessica felt a profound sense of justice tempered by heartbreak. These people, her son, her former daughter-in-law, had been willing to kill her for money. The betrayal was complete and irreversible. But as she looked around the room at the people who had protected her, Drive Martinez, Patty, Jimmy, Tommy, and Rebecca, Jessica realized something important. Family wasn't about blood relations or legal obligations. Family was about the people who chose to love and protect you when the stakes were highest. Rebecca approached the bed hesitantly. Mama, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know. You chose the right side when it mattered most, Jessica said simply. That's a start. As Marcus and Linda were led away in handcuffs, Marcus turned back toward his mother one final time. This isn't over, he said. his voice filled with venom. "I'll fight the charges. I'll contest the will. I'll make sure you regret this." Jessica smiled at her son with cold satisfaction. "Marcus, you still don't understand. The fight isn't just beginning. It's already over. And you lost the moment you chose money over your mother's life." The door closed behind the police and their prisoners, leaving Jessica surrounded by the people who had proven their loyalty when everything was on the line. Her real family. The one she had chosen, and who had chosen her in return. The aftermath of Marcus and Linda's arrest brought a strange calm to Jessica's hospital room, like the eerie quiet that follows a violent thunderstorm. Detective Hoffman had taken preliminary statements from everyone present, but the real reckoning was just beginning. Jessica knew that the next few hours would determine not just the legal consequences for her would-be murderers, but the future of every relationship that mattered to her. Dr. Martinez was the first to break the silence. "Mrs. Smith, I need to ask you directly, how long have you been fully conscious and aware?" "Since the night I overheard Marcus and Rebecca planning my funeral," Jessica replied, her voice steady despite the emotional exhaustion. "Everything since then, the apparent weakness, the unconsciousness, the declining condition, it was all performance. You've been manipulating your own medical treatment?" Dr. Martinez's professional concern was evident. "I've been protecting myself," Jessica corrected. "I reduced my pain medication, maintained awareness while appearing sedated, and yes, I exaggerated my symptoms to maintain the illusion that I was dying. But I never compromised my actual medical care." Jimmy, who had been standing silently near the window, turned to face the room. "Grandma, what you did tonight, setting that trap, recording everything, that took incredible courage. But it also took incredible planning. How did you know they would actually go through with it?" "Because I've spent 52 years watching your father make decisions based purely on self-interest," Jessica said sadly. "I kept hoping he might choose differently, might find some core of decency that would stop him. But when Linda started talking about accelerating my death, I realized that hope was naive." Rebecca, who had been crying quietly in the corner chair, finally spoke up. "Mama, I need to say something. To everyone here." She stood up, her hands shaking but her voice growing stronger. "What I did, what I was willing to do, there's no excuse for it. I let my financial desperation turn me into someone I don't recognize. Someone who was willing to let her own mother die for money. But you chose differently when it mattered," Tommy said quietly. "You helped stop them." "Only after I realized how far I'd fallen," Rebecca replied. "Only after I saw what I'd become reflected in my son's eyes. That doesn't erase what I was willing to do." Jessica studied her daughter's face, seeing genuine remorse mixed with self-recrimination. "Rebecca, what you did was unforgivable. But what you chose to do tonight, that took real courage. The question is, what happens now?" "I'll testify against Marcus and Linda," Rebecca said without hesitation. "I'll face whatever legal consequences come from my participation. And I'll spend whatever time I have left trying to earn back even a fraction of your trust." Dr. Martinez consulted her tablet, reviewing the evening's events. "Mrs. Smith, the video evidence we captured tonight is quite comprehensive. The district attorney will have a very strong case for attempted murder, conspiracy, and elder abuse. But I have to ask, what you've revealed tonight about your condition raises some ethical questions about the deception involved." "Doctor, my deception was self-defense against people planning to murder me," Jessica replied firmly. "Every medical decision I made was informed consent. I was never actually incompetent or unable to make my own choices. I was simply allowing people to believe what they wanted to believe while protecting myself." Patty, who had been quietly observing from the doorway, stepped forward. "Mrs. Smith, I need to apologize. As your nurse, I should have recognized that your family was dangerous. I should have done more to protect you." "Patty, you did everything right," Jessica said warmly. "You became my ally when I needed one most. You helped me gather evidence. You supported my plan, and you probably saved my life tonight." The door opened, and Bill Hartwell entered, looking unusually disheveled for a man who prided himself on always appearing perfectly composed. "Jessica, thank God you're safe," he said, approaching her bed. "I came as soon as I heard about the arrests. Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, Bill." Tired, but fine. Jessica's smile was the first genuine one she'd shown in days. How quickly can we move forward with the estate restructuring we discussed? Very quickly, given tonight's events. Marcus's attempted murder of his mother should void any claims he might have had to your estate. The charitable donations we discussed are already in process, and the new will we drafted is legally sound. Jimmy looked confused. New will? Your grandmother has been very busy these past few days, Bill explained. She's restructured her entire estate to reflect the reality of who her real family is versus who shares her DNA. Jessica took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to say would change everything permanently. I need to tell all of you what I've decided about my estate, about my business interests, and about my future. She looked around the room at the faces of the people who had proven their loyalty. Tommy with his unshakable moral compass. Jimmy with his military honor and genuine love. Rebecca, flawed but seeking redemption. Dr. Martinez and Patty, who had protected her when she was vulnerable. And Bill and Eleanor, friends who had supported her for decades. Marcus will inherit nothing, Jessica said clearly. His actions tonight have forfeited any claim to my estate. Linda obviously was never a beneficiary anyway. As for Rebecca tensed, clearly expecting the worst. Your inheritance will be placed in a trust, Jessica continued. You'll receive enough to pay off your debts and maintain your home. But the rest will be contingent on your continued efforts to make amends for your actions. The trust will be administered by Tommy, who has proven himself to be exactly the kind of person I hoped my grandchildren would become. Tommy's eyes widened. Grandma, I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of responsibility. You proved you were ready when you chose to protect me instead of protecting your family's reputation, Jessica replied. As for Jimmy, you'll inherit your father's intended share because you've shown the character he never developed. Jimmy looked stunned. But Grandma, I haven't done anything to earn. You chose love over money when it mattered most, Jessica interrupted. You were willing to stand against your own father to protect me. That's everything. The majority of my estate, Jessica continued, will go to the foundation I'm establishing to protect elderly people from family financial abuse. Dr. Martinez, I'd like you to serve on the board. Patty, I want you to help develop the programs that will identify and stop situations like mine before they escalate to attempted murder. The room was silent as everyone processed the full scope of Jessica's decisions. There's one more thing, Jessica said, her voice taking on the steel that had built her business empire. I want everyone in this room to understand that what happened tonight wasn't just about money or inheritance. It was about the fundamental choice between love and greed, between family and exploitation. She looked directly at Rebecca. Your brother made his choice. He chose money over his mother's life, and he'll live with the consequences of that choice for the rest of his life. You made a different choice, eventually, and now you'll have the chance to prove that choice was real. Detective Hoffman returned to collect final statements and evidence. As he prepared to leave, he turned to Jessica with obvious admiration. Mrs. Smith, what you did tonight, setting that trap, gathering evidence, forcing them to reveal their true intentions, that was some of the best police work I've seen in 20 years. You should consider a career change. Jessica laughed, the sound rich and genuine. Detective, I think I'll stick to retirement. But if you ever need help with other cases involving inheritance schemes, you know where to find me. As the hospital room gradually emptied, leaving only Jessica, Tommy, Jimmy, and Rebecca, the weight of everything that had changed settled over them. So what happens now? Rebecca asked quietly. Jessica looked at her daughter, her grandsons, and the future she was building from the ashes of her old family. Now we learn what family actually means, Jessica said. Not blood, not obligation, not financial expectation, just love, freely chosen and fiercely protected. The monitors had long since stopped their ominous beeping. In their place was something far more precious, the sound of authentic relationships being forged in the aftermath of ultimate betrayal. 3 weeks later, Jessica sat in Bill Hartwell's oak-paneled office, surrounded by legal documents that would reshape not just her legacy, but the lives of everyone who had tried to exploit her supposed weakness. The morning Charleston sun streamed through tall windows, illuminating papers that represented the complete financial destruction of Marcus's inheritance dreams and the elevation of those who had proven their loyalty. "The restructuring is complete," Bill announced, removing his reading glasses with evident satisfaction. "Marcus's claims to your estate have been legally voided due to his attempted murder conviction. The criminal charges created what we call forfeiture by felony. He cannot inherit from someone he tried to kill." Jessica nodded, feeling a deep sense of justice served. "And Linda?" "Linda Chun-Smith has been charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, and elder abuse. Her financial situation was already precarious due to her divorce from Marcus, and now she's facing both criminal penalties and civil lawsuits. The hospital is also pursuing charges for impersonating medical personnel and tampering with patient care." "What about the loans Marcus owed me?" Bill's smile was almost predatory. "All called in immediately. When he couldn't pay, we seized his assets, the house, his remaining business interests, even his car. He's filed for bankruptcy, but it won't protect him from the criminal restitution orders. He'll be paying for his attorney fees and court costs for decades, assuming he avoids significant prison time." Jessica felt no pleasure in her son's downfall, only the cold satisfaction of consequences finally catching up with actions. "And Rebecca?" "Rebecca's situation is more complex," Bill said, consulting another file. "Her cooperation with law enforcement and her testimony against Marcus and Linda has earned her leniency from prosecutors. She'll face probation and community service rather than prison time. As for her inheritance, the trust arrangement we discussed, fully implemented. She'll receive enough to pay off her debts and maintain her home, but the remainder is held in trust administered by Tommy. She can access additional funds only by demonstrating ongoing efforts at restitution and character rehabilitation." Jessica had insisted on this structure not out of cruelty, but from a lifetime of understanding human nature. Rebecca needed to prove that her redemption was genuine, not just convenient. "What about the charitable donations?" The Jessica Smith Foundation for Elder Protection is now officially established with an initial endowment of $3 million, exactly the amount Marcus expected to inherit. The foundation will work with law enforcement and medical professionals to identify and prevent elder abuse, particularly cases involving family exploitation. Eleanor entered the office at that moment, carrying coffee and wearing the expression of someone who had spent the morning spreading gossip with surgical precision. "The whole town is talking," Eleanor announced without preamble. "Marcus's arrest made the front page of the Post and Courier, and Linda's involvement has shocked everyone who knew her from her hospital volunteer work. The consensus seems to be that you've handled this with remarkable grace and intelligence." "And the social consequences?" Jessica asked. Eleanor's smile was wicked. "Marcus and Linda are social pariahs. No one wants to be associated with people who tried to murder an elderly mother for money. Meanwhile, you're being hailed as a hero for exposing elder abuse and turning a personal tragedy into protection for other vulnerable people." Dr. Martinez arrived for their scheduled meeting, looking professional but pleased. "Mrs. Smith, I wanted to update you on the Foundation's Medical Advisory Board. We've identified several geriatricians and psychiatrists who are eager to help develop protocols for identifying family exploitation in medical settings. And the hospital's response to what happened. Charleston General is implementing new procedures for monitoring family interactions with elderly patients. Linda's ability to access patient information and manipulate medical equipment has prompted a complete review of volunteer screening and supervision. We're also training staff to recognize signs of inheritance pressure and family coercion." Jessica felt a deep satisfaction knowing that her ordeal would protect others from similar experiences. "Dr. Martinez, I have a proposal. The Foundation needs a medical director, someone who understands both the clinical aspects of elder care and the ethical issues around family pressure. Would you consider the position?" Dr. Martinez's eyes lit up with interest. "That's an incredibly generous offer. I'd be honored to help." Tommy and Jimmy arrived together, both carrying folders that Jessica knew contained their new responsibilities as inheritors and Foundation board members. At 19 and 25, they were young to be handling such significant financial responsibility, but their character during the crisis had proven their readiness. "Grandma," Tommy said, settling into a chair beside her, "we've been reviewing the business assets and investment portfolio. It's overwhelming." Good overwhelming or bad overwhelming? Jessica asked with amusement. Good overwhelming, Jimmy replied. The catering business is actually more profitable than we realized, and your investment strategy has been brilliant. But we want to make sure we're honoring your vision for how these assets should be managed. Your vision is what matters now, Jessica said gently. I built this wealth to provide security and opportunity for people I loved. You two have proven you understand the difference between wealth as a tool and wealth as an end in itself. Bill spread out several documents on the conference table. Let's review the final distribution structure. Tommy, as the primary trustee for Rebecca's Rehabilitation Trust, you'll oversee her access to funds based on specific milestones we've established. Jimmy, your inheritance is unrestricted, but you've expressed interest in using it to complete your education and establish your own business ventures. I want to expand the catering business, Jimmy said. Maybe develop a nonprofit component that provides job training for veterans and at-risk youth. Grandma built something meaningful, and I want to honor that legacy. Jessica felt tears of pride gathering in her eyes. This was what she had hoped for. Not just the transfer of wealth, but the transfer of values and purpose. There's one more matter to address, Bill said, his tone becoming more serious. Marcus has been making threats from jail about contesting the will and challenging the foundation's establishment. He's claiming that you were mentally incompetent when you made these decisions. Eleanor snorted with disgust. The man tried to murder his mother, and now he's claiming she wasn't competent to disinherit him? What's his legal standing? Jessica asked. Essentially non-existent, Bill replied. We have extensive documentation of your mental competency, video evidence of his criminal behavior, and testimony from multiple medical professionals. But he may try to drag this through the courts for years, hoping to exhaust your resources or find a sympathetic judge. Let him try, Jessica said with steel in her voice. I have excellent legal representation, unlimited resources, and the moral high ground. More importantly, I have the truth. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor, Rebecca, looking tired but more at peace than Jessica had seen her in months. She carried a small wrapped package and approached her mother with obvious nervousness. Mama, I know I don't have the right to ask for your time, but I wanted to give you something. Jessica accepted the package and opened it carefully. Inside was a small, leather-bound journal. It's a record of everything I remember about the conversations with Marcus and Linda, Rebecca explained. Every detail I can recall about the planning, the financial discussions, the timeline. I thought it might help with the legal proceedings, but more than that, I wanted you to know that I'm committed to facing the full truth of what I did. Jessica flipped through the pages, seeing Rebecca's careful handwriting documenting the conspiracy in painful detail. This must have been difficult to write, Jessica said quietly. It was, but it was necessary. Mama, I know I can never undo what I was willing to do, what I was willing to let happen to you. But I want you to know that I'm in therapy. I'm working to understand how I became someone capable of such betrayal, and I'm committed to spending whatever time I have left trying to become worthy of being your daughter again. Jessica studied her daughter's face, seeing genuine remorse mixed with determination. Rebecca, redemption isn't something you can earn through suffering or penance. It's something you demonstrate through changed behavior over time. The question isn't whether you feel bad about what you did. The question is whether you've truly changed. I understand, and I'm prepared to spend however long it takes to prove that change is real. As the meeting concluded and everyone prepared to leave, Jessica felt a profound sense of completion. Marcus and Linda were facing justice. Rebecca was beginning the difficult work of redemption, and Tommy and Jimmy were positioned to build something meaningful from the wreckage of family betrayal. But most importantly, she had succeeded in her ultimate goal, turning apparent weakness into absolute strength, and using her supposed vulnerability as a weapon against those who would exploit it. Bill, she said as they gathered the legal documents, I want to establish one more charitable fund. Something specifically for legal aid for elderly people facing exploitation from family members. Too many people in my situation don't have the resources to fight back. Consider it done, Bill replied with admiration. Jessica, what you've accomplished here, exposing the conspiracy, protecting yourself, and turning your ordeal into protection for others. It's remarkable." Jessica smiled, feeling the satisfaction of a battle well fought and a victory well earned. "Bill, I've learned that the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building something so meaningful and lasting that their betrayal becomes the foundation for protecting others." As she left the law office that afternoon, Jessica reflected on the journey from victim to victor. Her family had tried to plan her death while she was living. Instead, she had planned their moral and financial death while very much alive. And in doing so, she had discovered what family really meant. Not blood or obligation, but love freely chosen and fiercely protected. 6 months after the arrest, Charleston's late autumn sun cast golden light across Jessica's restored Queen Anne mansion on Meeting Street. The house had always been her sanctuary, but now it felt like something more, a symbol of survival, of wisdom earned through betrayal, and of the new life she was building from the ashes of her old family. Jessica stood in her renovated kitchen, the heart of the catering empire she had built from nothing 40 years ago. The space buzzed with activity as Jimmy coordinated the preparation for their first major event since the scandal, a charity gala for the Jessica Smith Foundation for Elder Protection. The irony wasn't lost on her. The money Marcus had expected to inherit was now funding the very organization that would prevent others from experiencing what she had endured. "Grandma Jess, the final head count is 350, Jimmy called out, consulting his tablet while directing the catering staff with natural authority. The mayor's office confirmed, along with the police chief, and Dr. Martinez says the hospital administration is sending a full delegation. At 25, Jimmy had proven himself far more capable than his father had ever been. His military training had given him organizational skills and leadership qualities that translated perfectly to business management. More importantly, his moral clarity provided a compass that Marcus had always lacked. "How are the finances looking?" Jessica asked, reviewing the menu with the satisfaction of someone who had never lost her passion for feeding people well. "Better than projected," Jimmy replied with a grin. "Turns out that surviving your own family's murder plot makes you something of a celebrity in Charleston society. Everyone wants to support the foundation, and half the city is curious to meet the woman who outsmarted would-be killers from her hospital bed." Eleanor appeared in the kitchen doorway, impeccably dressed as always but carrying the satisfied expression of someone who had spent months watching her friend's enemies face consequences. "Jessica, darling, you need to see the guest list," Eleanor said, waving an elegant hand toward the dining room. "The cream of Charlton society, plus reporters from 3 newspapers and 2 television stations. Your little foundation gala has become the social event of the season. My little foundation has a $3 million endowment and is already working with 5 hospitals across South Carolina," Jessica replied with amusement. "I'd hardly call it little anymore." The past 6 months had transformed Jessica's ordeal into something meaningful and lasting. The foundation had already identified 12 cases of potential elder abuse, provided legal aid to 6 families, and established protocols that had been adopted by medical facilities across the region. What had begun as personal revenge had evolved into genuine protection for vulnerable people. Tommy burst through the kitchen door, his pre-med textbooks balanced precariously in his arms alongside foundation paperwork. "Sorry I'm late," he called out, setting his books on the counter. "Organic chemistry lab ran over, and then I had a meeting with the foundation's legal team about the new legislation proposal." At 19, Tommy was carrying responsibilities that would challenge someone twice his age. Besides managing Rebecca's Rehabilitation Trust, he was also spearheading legislative efforts to strengthen elder abuse protections and serving as the foundation's youth advocate coordinator. "How did the meeting go?" Jessica asked, noting the tired satisfaction in her grandson's eyes. "Better than expected. Senator Williams thinks we have a real chance of getting the Elder Safety and Family Accountability Act passed in the next legislative session. The provisions for mandatory reporting by medical professionals and the enhanced penalties for family exploitation are getting bipartisan support." Jessica felt a surge of pride watching Tommy articulate complex legal and social issues with the confidence of someone far beyond his years. The crisis had revealed not just who could be trusted, but who had the strength to build something meaningful from tragedy. The afternoon brought Dr. Martinez for their monthly foundation board meeting. As medical director, she had brought both credibility and practical expertise to their efforts, helping to develop screening protocols that were already being implemented across the region. "The preliminary data from our pilot programs is encouraging," Dr. Martinez reported, spreading charts across Jessica's dining room table. "Hospitals using our screening protocols have identified 43 cases of suspected family exploitation in the past 4 months. More importantly, 28 of those cases have been referred for legal intervention before any physical harm occurred." "Prevention rather than prosecution," Jessica murmured, reviewing the statistics. "That's exactly what we hoped for." "There's something else," Dr. Martinez continued. "The American Geriatric Society wants to feature our work in their national conference next spring. They're calling it a model for community-based elder protection." Eleanor raised her coffee cup in a mock toast. "From attempted murder victim to national expert in elder protection. Jessica, you've certainly made the most of your near-death experience." The irony was indeed profound. Marcus and Linda's attempt to kill her had not only failed spectacularly, but had catapulted Jessica into a position of influence she never could have imagined. Her story had become a rallying cry for elder protection advocates, and her foundation was being studied as a template for similar organizations nationwide. The kitchen door opened again, and Rebecca entered hesitantly. Even 6 months after the crisis, she still approached family gatherings with the careful uncertainty of someone earning back trust one day at a time. "Mama, I don't want to interrupt the meeting, but I wanted to update you on the community service project," Rebecca said, staying near the doorway as if ready to retreat at the first sign of unwelcome. Jessica gestured for her daughter to join them at the table. The rehabilitation process had been as difficult as Jessica had expected, but Rebecca's commitment to making amends had proven genuine. She was attending therapy twice a week, had completed over 200 hours of community service at a senior center, and was slowly beginning to rebuild relationships with her children. "How's the literacy program going?" Jessica asked. "We've taught 43 seniors to use basic computer technology, and 15 have enrolled in online courses to complete their high school diplomas," Rebecca reported with quiet pride. "Mrs. Patterson, she's 82, just sent her first email to her grandson in California. She cried when his response came back." This was the Rebecca that Jessica remembered from childhood, the daughter who had once spent her allowance buying groceries for an elderly neighbor, who had volunteered at animal shelters and tutored struggling classmates. The crisis had revealed how far greed could corrupt someone, but it had also created an opportunity for Rebecca to rediscover her better nature. "The Trust Administrator's report shows you've met all the requirements for this quarter," Tommy said, consulting his files. "Your therapy attendance is consistent, your community service hours exceed the minimum, and you've maintained stable employment." Rebecca nodded, but her expression remained serious. "Tommy, I need you to understand that I'm not doing this just to access the trust funds. I'm doing it because I need to become someone I can live with, someone my children can be proud of." "I know, Mom," Tommy replied gently. "And for what it's worth, I think you're succeeding." The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor, Patty Williams, still in her nursing scrubs from the day shift at Charleston General. "Mrs. Smith, I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced," Patty said, accepting Jessica's offer of coffee. "I wanted to update you on something happening at the hospital." "Of course. What's going on?" "Remember Linda's volunteer work in the cardiac wing? Well, the hospital has been reviewing her access logs and patient interactions from the past 3 years. They found some concerning patterns." Jessica felt a chill of apprehension. What kind of patterns? At least 6 elderly patients under Linda's volunteer supervision experienced unexpected complications during their recovery periods. Complications that led to accelerated deaths. The hospital is launching a formal investigation, and the police may reopen several cases as potential homicides. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Linda's attempt to murder Jessica might not have been her first time manipulating medical situations to achieve desired outcomes. "Dear God," Eleanor whispered. "How many people might she have killed?" "We don't know yet," Patty replied. "But the investigation is expanding. Your case broke this open, Mrs. Smith. If you hadn't caught her in the act, If you hadn't recorded her confession, she might have continued killing vulnerable patients for years. Jessica felt a profound sense of vindication mixed with horror. Her decision to fight back had not only saved her own life but potentially exposed a serial killer who had been operating under the cover of charitable volunteer work. Dr. Martinez leaned forward intently. "Patty, what's the hospital's response to these discoveries?" "Complete overhaul of volunteer screening and supervision. Background checks. Psychological evaluations. Continuous monitoring of volunteer interactions with patients. They're also implementing the Foundation's early warning protocols for family exploitation immediately rather than waiting for the pilot program to conclude." Jimmy looked up from his catering preparations. "Grandma, this means your Foundation's work is even more important than we realized. We're not just preventing family exploitation, we're helping expose systematic abuse of vulnerable patients." As evening approached and the gala preparations intensified, Jessica found herself reflecting on the journey from victim to advocate. 6 months ago, she had been lying in a hospital bed, listening to her children plan her funeral while she was still alive. Now she was hosting Charleston's social elite to raise money for an organization that would protect countless elderly people from similar exploitation. Marcus remained in prison, his appeals consistently denied, and his reputation permanently destroyed. The local newspapers regularly featured updates on his case, always emphasizing the shocking nature of a son attempting to murder his mother for inheritance money. His bankruptcy had been finalized, leaving him with nothing but legal debts and the prospect of years in prison. Linda's situation had become even more dire. The hospital investigation had uncovered evidence suggesting she might have been involved in as many as 8 suspicious deaths over 3 years. While the original charges related to Jessica's case were serious enough, the potential serial murder charges would likely ensure she never saw freedom again. "Mama," Rebecca said as they prepared for the evening's event, "I know this might not be the right time, but I need to say something." Jessica paused in her preparation, noting the serious tone in her daughter's voice. "What you've built from what we tried to do to you, this foundation, this movement to protect elderly people, it's extraordinary. You took our betrayal and turned it into something that will save lives. I don't know how you found the strength to do that." "I found the strength because I had no choice," Jessica replied simply. "I could let what you and Marcus did destroy me, or I could use it to build something meaningful. The choice was obvious." "Will you ever be able to forgive me completely?" Jessica considered the question carefully. "Rebecca, forgiveness isn't a moment. It's a process. Every day that you choose to be better than you were during the crisis, every person you help through your community service, every time you choose integrity over convenience, that's another step toward earning complete forgiveness. But more importantly, it's another step toward forgiving yourself." As the first guests began arriving for the gala, Jessica stood in her foyer, surrounded by the people who had proven their loyalty during her darkest hour. Tommy and Jimmy, handsome in their evening wear and radiating the confidence of young men who had discovered their own moral courage. Dr. Martinez and Patty, professional partners who had become dear friends. Eleanor, whose sharp wit and unwavering loyalty had been Jessica's anchor throughout the ordeal. Even Rebecca, humbled but working diligently toward redemption. The evening would celebrate the Foundation's achievements and raise money for its expansion. But for Jessica, the real victory was simpler and more profound. She had survived the ultimate betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser, and surrounded by people who loved her for who she was rather than what she owned. As the mayor and police chief arrived, followed by local media and the cream of Charleston society, Jessica felt a deep satisfaction. They were coming to honor not just her survival, but her transformation of personal trauma into public service. Marcus had wanted to plan her death while she was living. Instead, she had planned a legacy that would protect vulnerable people long after she was gone. That, she reflected with quiet satisfaction, was the last laugh indeed. 1 year later, the morning sun painted Charleston's historic district in shades of gold and amber, as Jessica Smith prepared for what would be one of the most significant days of her 77 years. Today marked not just her birthday, but the culmination of a journey that had transformed personal betrayal into a legacy of protection for vulnerable elderly people across the nation. She stood in her kitchen, now the nerve center of both her rebuilt catering empire and the foundation that bore her name, watching the organized chaos of preparation for two simultaneous celebrations. Her birthday party would be intimate, limited to the chosen family who had proven their love when everything was at stake. But the Foundation's first annual gala had grown into a national event, with delegates from 12 states coming to Charleston to study their model for elder protection. "Grandma Jess, the morning news wants a final interview before the gala tonight," Jimmy called out, looking remarkably composed for someone coordinating media requests while managing catering for 400 guests. "They're calling you Charleston's guardian angel and want to feature the Foundation's national expansion." Jessica smiled at the title, remembering the helpless woman she had pretended to be just 1 year ago. "Tell them I'll do the interview, but only if they focus on the Foundation's work rather than my personal story." This was never about revenge. It was about prevention. The past year had exceeded Jessica's wildest expectations for the Foundation's impact. What had begun as a $3 million endowment created from Marcus's forfeited inheritance had grown to over $8 million through corporate donations, government grants, and contributions from families who had been helped by their interventions. The Jessica Smith Foundation was now operating in 6 states, had prevented over 300 cases of confirmed elder abuse, and had become the template for federal legislation currently moving through Congress. Tommy burst through the kitchen door, his arms full of law books and Foundation reports, looking every inch the confident young man who had found his calling in the intersection of medicine and advocacy. At 20, he was completing both his pre-med requirements and a law degree through an accelerated program, driven by a passion for elder advocacy that had emerged from his grandmother's crisis. "The congressional hearing went better than expected," Tommy announced, setting his materials on the counter. "Senator Williams thinks the Elder Protection and Family Accountability Act will pass the Senate by spring. They're using our Foundation's data as the primary evidence for why federal intervention is necessary." Jessica felt a surge of pride watching her grandson articulate complex policy issues with authority that belied his years. Tommy had become the Foundation's primary spokesperson for legislative affairs, testifying before state and federal committees with the moral clarity that had first revealed itself during the crisis. "What about the medical school applications?" Jessica asked, noting the slight exhaustion around Tommy's eyes that spoke to his demanding schedule. "Acceptances from 4 programs so far, including Johns Hopkins and Harvard. But I'm leaning towards staying at MUSC so I can continue working with the Foundation while I complete my medical training. Dr. Martinez thinks I could develop a specialty in geriatric advocacy, essentially becoming a physician who specializes in identifying and preventing elder abuse in medical settings." The kitchen door opened to admit Dr. Martinez, who had become far more than the Foundation's medical director. She was now Jessica's close friend and one of the most respected voices in the national conversation about elder protection. "Jessica, I have news that's going to make your birthday very special," Dr. Martinez said, her eyes bright with excitement. "The American Medical Association just announced they're establishing the Jessica Smith Award for Excellence in Elder Advocacy. It will be given annually to medical professionals who demonstrate exceptional commitment to protecting elderly patients from family exploitation." Jessica felt tears gathering in her eyes. A year ago, she had been lying in a hospital bed, listening to her children plan her murder. Now, her name would be permanently associated with protecting vulnerable people in medical settings. "There's more," Dr. Martinez continued. "The award comes with a $50,000 grant for research or advocacy work, and the inaugural recipient will be announced at the AMA's national conference next month. They want you to present the first award." Eleanor swept into the kitchen with characteristic dramatic flair, carrying an armload of newspapers and wearing the expression of someone who had been enjoying a particularly satisfying morning of social warfare. "Jessica, darling, you absolutely must see the coverage of last night's court proceedings," Eleanor announced, spreading newspapers across the counter. Marcus's final appeal was denied unanimously, and Linda's trial for the serial murder charges begins next week. The headlines are delicious. Jessica glanced at the papers, noting headlines like Charleston's son's murder plot finally resolved, and hospital volunteer accused of killing 8 elderly patients. The media coverage had been relentless but fair, focusing on the systematic nature of the abuse rather than sensationalizing the family drama. "What's Marcus's sentence now?" Jimmy asked, looking up from his event planning. 15 years for attempted murder, conspiracy, and elder abuse, with no possibility of parole for 7 years. Eleanor replied with satisfaction. "His bankruptcy is final, his reputation is destroyed, and he'll be 67 when he's eligible for release, if he lives that long. Prison hasn't been kind to someone who tried to murder his elderly mother for money." Jessica felt no joy in her son's downfall, only the cold satisfaction of justice served. Marcus had made his choices, and now he was living with the consequences. More importantly, his imprisonment served as a powerful deterrent to others who might consider exploiting vulnerable family members. "And Linda?" Dr. Martinez asked. "The hospital investigation uncovered evidence linking her to 8 suspicious deaths over 3 years," Eleanor reported grimly. "All elderly patients, all during recovery periods, when she had unsupervised access, all resulting in sudden complications that led to accelerated deaths. The prosecution believes she was practicing a form of medical murder, possibly for insurance payouts or to cover up other crimes." The scope of Linda's alleged crimes had shocked even those who knew her capability for manipulation. What had seemed like an isolated plot against Jessica had revealed itself as part of a pattern of systematic murder targeting vulnerable hospital patients. The afternoon brought Rebecca, who had continued her rehabilitation with the kind of determined consistency that suggested genuine change rather than convenient performance. She carried a wrapped gift and moved with the careful confidence of someone who had learned to live with the consequences of past choices while building something better. "Mama, I know birthdays are complicated for us now," Rebecca said, approaching Jessica with the respectful uncertainty that had characterized their relationship since the crisis. "But I wanted to give you something that represents what this year has meant to me." Jessica unwrapped the gift carefully, revealing a leather-bound photo album filled with pictures from Rebecca's community service work. Page after page showed Rebecca teaching computer skills to elderly residents at assisted living facilities, helping with foundation events, and working with legislative committees on elder protection laws. "It's a record of my rehabilitation," Rebecca explained quietly. "Not the court-mandated parts, but the parts that matter. The moments when I remembered who I used to be before greed made me into someone I didn't recognize." Jessica flipped through the pages, seeing her daughter's genuine engagement with the people she was helping. In the photos, Rebecca's face showed the kind of contentment that comes from meaningful work rather than obligatory service. "How's therapy going?" Jessica asked. "Different now. For the first 6 months, I was just trying to understand how I became someone who could betray you. Now I'm working on becoming someone worthy of your forgiveness, not just earning it back, but actually deserving it." Tommy looked up from his legal briefs. "Mom, the trust administrator's report shows you've exceeded all requirements for 3 consecutive quarters. Mama Jess, if you're ready, we could consider transitioning Rebecca to full inheritance access." Jessica studied her daughter's face, seeing not just remorse but genuine transformation. The past year had tested Rebecca's commitment to change, and she had met every challenge with consistency and grace. "Rebecca, the trust was never meant to be permanent punishment," Jessica said gently. "It was meant to provide structure for rebuilding trust. If you're ready for full responsibility, and if Tommy agrees as administrator, then we can make that transition." "I'd like to keep the structure for a while longer," Rebecca replied, surprising everyone. "Not because it's required, but because it helps me stay accountable. I never want to become the person I was during the crisis again." The evening brought the Foundation's gala, held in the grand ballroom of Charleston's historic Francis Marion Hotel. Jessica moved through the crowd of supporters, advocates, medical professionals, and government officials, marveling at how her personal nightmare had become a rallying point for national change. The keynote speaker was Senator Williams, who had championed the federal legislation that grew out of the Foundation's work. Her speech emphasized the critical need for systematic protection of elderly Americans from family exploitation. The Jessica Smith Foundation has demonstrated that individual courage can become collective action, Senator Williams told the assembled crowd. What began as one woman's fight for survival has become a national movement to protect our most vulnerable citizens. As the evening progressed, Jessica found herself in conversation with families who had been helped by the Foundation's interventions. A widow from Colombia whose adult children had been pressuring her to sign over her home. An elderly man from Greenville whose nephew had been systematically draining his bank accounts. A couple from Savannah whose daughter-in-law had been manipulating their medical care to accelerate inheritance timing. Each story reinforced Jessica's conviction that her ordeal had been transformed into something genuinely meaningful. These people were alive, independent, and protected because she had chosen to fight back rather than accept victimization. The gala's highlight came when Dr. Martinez presented the Foundation's annual report. In its first full year of operation, the Jessica Smith Foundation had prevented 347 confirmed cases of elder abuse across 6 states, provided legal aid to 89 families facing inheritance pressure, trained over 1,200 medical professionals in abuse recognition protocols, influenced legislation in 12 states and contributed to federal law development, established partnerships with 43 hospitals and 67 assisted living facilities. They represent grandparents who will see their grandchildren graduate, elderly couples who will celebrate more anniversaries, and vulnerable people who will maintain their dignity and independence because Jessica Smith chose courage over surrender. As the formal program concluded and guests mingled during the reception, Jessica stepped onto the hotel's historic balcony overlooking Charleston Harbor. The city spread out below her, lights twinkling like stars reflected in water, while the harbor breeze carried the salt smell of the Atlantic. Jimmy joined her on the balcony, carrying 2 glasses of champagne, and wearing the quiet satisfaction of someone who had found his calling in meaningful work. "Grandma, do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't overheard that conversation in the hospital?" Jimmy asked. If Marcus and Linda had succeeded? Jessica considered the question, imagining an alternate timeline where greed had triumphed over justice. "I think about it sometimes. I think about all the people who wouldn't have been protected, all the families who would still be suffering in silence, all the vulnerable elderly people who would have remained at risk. Do you ever regret how things turned out? The family destruction, the public scrutiny, the loss of privacy?" "Never," Jessica replied without hesitation. "Jimmy, what I lost was the illusion of family based on blood and obligation. What I gained was genuine family based on love and choice. What Marcus and Rebecca did to me revealed who they really were underneath their masks of affection. Better to know the truth and deal with it than to live in comfortable delusion." Tommy appeared in the balcony doorway, his face glowing with the kind of excitement that comes from unexpected good news. "Grandma, you need to come inside," Tommy said urgently. "There's someone here you need to meet." Jessica allowed herself to be led back into the ballroom, where a distinguished elderly gentleman was waiting with Dr. Martinez and Eleanor. He appeared to be in his 80s, impeccably dressed, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority and respect. "Mrs. Smith, I'd like you to meet Judge Harold Davidson, retired from the Federal Court of Appeals," Dr. Martinez said. "He has a story he'd like to share with you." Judge Davidson approached Jessica with obvious emotion, his hands shaking slightly as he extended them toward her. "Mrs. Smith, I came here tonight to thank you personally," Judge Davidson said, his voice thick with feeling. "6 months ago, my own family began pressuring me to sign over power of attorney and liquidate my assets. They convinced me I was becoming incompetent, that I needed their protection. If not for your foundation's intervention and the protocols you've established, I would have lost everything to my own children and grandchildren." Jessica felt the familiar surge of validation that came from knowing her suffering had prevented someone else's exploitation. "Judge Davidson, I'm so glad we could help. What happened?" "My physician had attended one of your foundation's training seminars on recognizing family pressure tactics. When my son brought me in for what he claimed was a routine appointment, but was actually an attempt to get a medical declaration of incompetence, my doctor recognized the manipulation and contacted your foundation. Your legal aid program helped me understand my rights and protect my assets. Judge Davidson paused, clearly struggling with emotion. Mrs. Smith, you saved my life, not in the dramatic way you saved your own, but in the quiet way of preserving my dignity, my independence, and my ability to make my own choices. Your foundation has given me back my life. As the evening wound down and guests began departing, Jessica found herself surrounded by the core group of people who had become her true family, Tommy and Jimmy, discussing their plans for expanding the Foundation's medical advocacy program. Rebecca, quietly helping with cleanup while maintaining the respectful boundaries she had learned to observe. Dr. Martinez and Patty, planning the next phase of their research into institutional abuse prevention. Eleanor, regaling Bill Hartwell with stories of Marcus's social downfall, while he chuckled appreciatively at the precision of Jessica's legal revenge. Before we all go home, Jessica said, gathering everyone's attention, I want to say something about this year. The room quieted as Jessica looked around at the faces of people who had proven their love through actions rather than words. A year ago, I thought my family was my biological children and their families. I thought love was something you inherited along with DNA, something guaranteed by blood relationships. Marcus and Rebecca taught me how wrong I was about that. She paused, seeing Rebecca wince slightly at the reference to her betrayal, but also seeing the acceptance in her daughter's eyes. What I've learned is that real family is something you choose, and something that chooses you back. Real family stands with you when standing with you costs them something. Real family protects you when you're vulnerable, rather than exploiting that vulnerability. Jessica's voice grew stronger as she continued. Marcus chose money over his mother's life, and he's paying the price for that choice. Linda chose murder over morality, and she'll spend the rest of her life in prison. But Rebecca chose redemption over resentment, and she's rebuilding her character one day at a time. Tommy and Jimmy chose justice over family loyalty, and they've become the kind of men I always hoped they would be. She looked at Dr. Martinez, Patty, Eleanor, and Bill. And all of you chose to stand with a vulnerable old woman when it would have been easier to look the other way. You chose to help transform personal tragedy into public protection. The real last laugh, Jessica concluded, isn't that I survived my family's attempt to murder me. It's that their betrayal became the foundation for protecting thousands of other vulnerable people. Their greed became the seed of generosity. Their conspiracy became the catalyst for justice. As the group prepared to leave, each person carrying with them the satisfaction of meaningful work and genuine relationships, Jessica reflected on the journey from victim to advocate, from vulnerable target to national leader. Marcus had wanted to plan her death while she was living. Instead, she had planned a legacy that would protect vulnerable people long after she was gone. But more than that, she had discovered that the most profound victory wasn't defeating your enemies. It was building something so meaningful from their betrayal that their destruction became the foundation for others' protection. Standing in her kitchen later that night, surrounded by the quiet satisfaction of a day well lived and a purpose well served, Jessica Smith smiled as she looked toward whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. After all, she had learned that apparent weakness could become absolute strength, that vulnerability could become power, and that the last laugh belonged to those who transformed personal trauma into public service. At 77, Jessica Smith was just getting started. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. ...